There's never going to be a photograph that is just a perfect painting. We often need to do some cropping and eliminate some things from the picture to make it into a good scene to paint. This photograph is kind of an extreme example of that. We have this metal beam that I want to take out because my main area of interest is right behind it. I needed to remove this and I needed to crop in order to make this a scene that is paintable. Sometimes it's just a matter of seeing the potential in a subject and removing things that aren't wanted and cropping to make it into a stronger subject. Once I lay my drawing in, I wet down the front and the back of my paper and I lay the paper down on my surface. Now I'm ready to paint the first wash of the scene. What you'll notice is the bit of the sail here that's folded up is one of the lightest parts of the painting, along with the figure and the boat over here. I have these really light areas of the scene that I need to be mindful of and paint around in this first wash. So the first thing that I do is I lay in just a little bit of light tone for each of those. A little bit of raw sienna just to take away the white of the paper and create a warm light area. The paper is still damp. I'm going to start at the top and paint the sky. And for this I'm using some Cerulean Blue, some Cobalt Blue, and some Lavender to get this particular shade of blue. Now I'm painting down and I've reached the area where there are some trees and grass on the other side of the river. Now I want to lay in some of that now, but before I do that, I'm going to take a paper towel and I'm going to dry some of these areas of light color that I am going to preserve. So I'm just pushing down, lifting off to take away some of the wetness near those areas that I need to paint around in this scene. So once I've done that, I'm ready to start adding in some of the green for the distant trees and hills. I'm using some raw sienna and some Cobalt Turquoise, that combination to mix up these greens. And I've laid in some softness for the trees in the background, and I'm bringing that right down to the shoreline on the other side of the river. And I'm laying in some of the softness for the trees above that. I'm going to come back in later and paint the darker trees over the top of this. But right now, I need to think about the light in that area of the scene and lay in those lighter values. Now I need to paint the color for the water. And for that, I'm using some Cobalt Blue, some Cerulean, and bringing that down, painting around the sail. Now, you'll notice that some of that blue drifted onto the sail that needs to be a brighter, lighter color. I'm not going to worry about that too much. I know that I can lift off some of that and still get the brightness that I need for that area. So I'm carefully bringing the water down, painting around the figure, this area of the sail, and my light colored boat. And you'll notice once again, I have the paper towel and I'm lifting off some areas that are drifting down onto the boat. You'll notice in the water, we have some different shades of color. We have some blue, we have some warm, and some green that's being reflected. So I want to show some of that when I lay this color in for the water. I don't want to just use the same color of blue all the way from the distant, all the way from the distant back, all the way down to the front. So I'm adding in a little bit of burnt sienna into that mixture to give it a little bit of warmth and add some variety into this blue. Now I'm coming back up here with a smaller brush, lifting off the blue that's drifting down into this area. One more time, I know this is a pain, it's just something I have to get through in this first wash. I'm using this smaller brush to kind of feather things out and make it look more natural and not so cut out. There's a reflection of this lighter colored boat in the distance. I'm taking this clean, damp brush and just lifting off some of this to create that white reflection in the water. This is a key area of the painting here. This is the main focus, is my figure. And now I'm going to add in some skin tone. I'm using some raw sienna and some rose madder permanent. And I want to drop that skin tone in now. And yes, I'm letting it fuzz into the background. It's okay if a little bit of that fuzzes in. When I come back in with the stronger values for the figure, it's going to make all of that make sense. And a similar color mixture is what I'm using here for the wood at the top of the boat. Dropping that in, connecting it in to this wet shape. It's helpful when you're painting complicated things like this to look at the shape and really squint. Look at the areas that are light and the areas that are in shadow. That helps you make sense of this complex object as you try and paint it. If I just look at it normally and just think of it as a boat and all the numerous complicated items down here in the boat and all those shapes, it becomes a lot more complicated in my head. If you can simplify it and just look at the shapes, the light area, the dark area, and try to paint it more abstractly, it actually becomes easier to paint. Now I'm going to come down here and finish up the foreground for the light values, adding in some of the wood color. Now I'm going to paint the light value of the boat. For that, I'm using raw sienna and more Cobalt Turquoise to come up with the green for this boat. Now I'm going to finish up the pontoon boat. I'm doing the same thing I did over when I painted this other boat. I'm squinting at it. I'm looking for areas of light and middle value and preserving those areas of light and painting everything else. At this phase, I'm going to let everything dry and then come back in and paint the middle values. I'm going to start up at the top and I'm going to add some more green to the distant trees and get that shape into place. Cobalt Turquoise raw sienna, that's my main mixture here. Dropping in a darker version of that with some neutral tint into the trees to give that shape a little bit of form. And now that that's in place, I'm going to go down to the shoreline and you can see reflections on the water. I'm going to use that reflection, let me zip ahead a little bit, as a large connected shape between all of this and the boat. So keep that in mind as we work through this. I'm using kind of a neutral gray here, some raw sienna, some neutral tint, just mixing that up, using some of my green and adding some cobalt blue to it. And this is another time in the painting process where it's helpful to squint. I'm looking at the shape of the reflections. I don't want to get, lost with every ripple in the water. I'm trying to see it as one shape and using it as a connector. And there are parts of this folded up sail that I wanted to connect into that a little warmer here. I'm using some raw sienna and connecting that in, bringing the water down. Now, a subtle little thing for the reflection of the water, I'm lifting off some vertical, lighter reflections. That helps it feel more like water. Now I'm going to connect this into the shape of the boat. So I'm using more of that same color, more cobalt turquoise with some neutral tint and raw sienna to get this mixture here, darkening it up at the top with some neutral tint and connecting it right into the bottom, the shadow shape, using more raw sienna to get that warmer color of the reflection on the water. Now when I get to the bottom of the boat, I want to connect it into the walkway using some burnt sienna there and some neutral tint. And I want to connect the walkway into the reflection and adding some blue into that reflection. Again, the reflection, another area, these shadows and reflections on the water, it's another area where it's important to squint and create an impression of that area. And now I want to tie that back into this boat that I have over on the right. And again, squinting while I look at it, tying the shadows into that shape, tying the reflection over on this part of the water into the boat. And that right there is the middle connected shape of the scene. Now, once this dries, I'm ready to get into the details. We're going to bring this whole thing together. As I paint this figure, there's a shadow side of his shirt that's darker than the water behind it. That's going to give us emphasis and form on the figure's back. So a little bit of cobalt blue, neutral tint, raw sienna, and adding the shadow, little bits of detail on the figure. And even on his arm, there's a shadow side to his arm. I'm using the same thing I use for the skin tone, just a darker version of that. So a little bit of raw sienna, rose madder permanent, just darker than what I used before. We're already starting to create a nice feeling of light and shadow and giving this figure some form. Now for his shorts, some blue there. And I just think it's so fun when it finally starts to look like something. And I want to connect that into some of the shadow shape in the boat, connecting the figure right into that, letting those colors run together, adding in some of the darker shadows on the boat, and stopping when I get down here to that lighter part of the boat to define that edge. And it's pretty great when you start getting the detail in. This part of the painting is starting to come together. It's feeling closer to us than the distance, and that's a good sign. Little bits of detail on the boat, on the figure, the shadow side. And now I need to add some of the shadow of the figure's face. This will really help give his head some form and a little bit of detail on the side of the hat. So by taking my time with this figure and by looking simply at the light areas, the middle values and the darks, and carefully laying them in, I can get a nice lifelike figure that isn't overworked. And for me, painting an impression of the scene and to create lifelike figures with just enough detail to let them read as figures and breathe life into the scene, I get really excited about that. And an important part of this painting is the rigging that I need to paint on the boat here. What I'm using is a rigger brush. I also use some scrap paper. It's really important to try out the mark that you're going to make on a piece of scrap paper first. Then when I'm ready to make the mark, I actually turn the paper to a more comfortable angle so I can make a nice straight line with my rigger brush. So this motion here is much more natural than me trying to make that mark going the opposite direction. Confidently starting the mark here and just pulling away and letting that mark just fade off on the edge. You can see here, it's less defined over here. It gets a lot sharper at the part where I start that mark. So I suggest really taking your time when you need to make these fine lines. You only have one go at that. Use your scrap paper to get that brush loaded up the right way to know exactly the mark you're going to make before you make it on your painting. And then turn that painting to get to the angle that's really comfortable to make one straight fluid mark. So I'm turning that, getting the rest of the rigging into place. Sorry, I know that's disorienting if you're watching along. And there were some more rigging here, and I'm looking at it, trying to create it loosely as much as I can and not get too consumed with every one of these lines being exactly right. I'm more interested in creating a line that is nice and fluid and not just overworked where you're doing part of the line and stopping and part of the line and stopping. I just try to get it on there nice and confidently and leave it. Added the details for that distant boat. And now I'm adding more detail here on that pontoon boat in the bottom right, the darks over the top of the middle values and the lights. And I liked the feeling of light I was able to create here. I know it's subtle, it's not that important, but this was a fun little area of the scene to paint. And into some more darks on the boat. And I needed a little more attention down here at the bottom to finish this part of the scene. So I'm adding some more texture and a little bit of darks and details here to let that area of the scene feel closer to us. And the boat was a little bit light in value, so I did one more wash of the same color over the top of the boat to increase that value and darken that up. And a few more lines. I just kept fiddling with this, trying to get to the right amount of detail without overworking it. That's always the balance we're trying to find, is letting it feel finished but not just overburden it with details. And finally, the last thing I do is add a little rope swooping down from the boat towards the dock. And there's a look at the final painting. So taking your time, working through each phase of the scene, really squinting and trying to abstract as much detail as you can really help you create a bold scene with strong and believable light. In this video today, we went over a lot of things. If you have questions about the way that I paint, my planning process, or if you're just looking for general help with watercolor painting, I send this to all my students. It's a great way to get started in this way of painting. Take a look at this. Have you ever been really excited about a painting and you get all set up, you find that right reference that you're excited about, and then it's time to go and you feel lost? I have a free resource that I want to give to you today that can help with these problems. My 5 steps to plan a successful watercolor painting. I walk you through the crucial planning phase of your painting that will help you understand what you're going to paint first, second, and third. The planning is really so important, especially in watercolor. This medium is harder to correct. It's so immediate. So having that plan is very important. I send you a PDF that you can download. And the great thing about this is you can have it on your phone. You could print it out. You can download this right now before you start your next painting. All you have to do is follow this link here and download my 5-step guide to planning a successful watercolor painting.